Hi, this is Josh Marshall, and this is the Josh Marshall podcast. We got a lot of Trump stuff going on. I mean, I guess when have we not had a lot of Trump stuff going on for the last 7 years or so? But just before we started recording, there's a new piece out saying basically that grand jury in Manhattan, they're not going to do anything for the next month. They're kind of off, or I guess they're off, but they're hearing uh, they're hearing evidence in another case or something like that. So all the day to day intense, kind of court watch and everything, I guess, is off for the headline. At first, I wasn't sure if they meant like for the next month, like the rest of the month, like i.e. 2 days, but I think they mean through April. And before that came out, Trump himself was he was on the True Social, his little his lifestyle social network, praising the grand jury, like they've finally seen the light, they're legit, all this kind of stuff. So I, people people get very into this knowing, kind of like, I knew it, there's never going to be an indictment, I'm not going to fall for this again, it's never going to happen, nothing ever happens to him, where this kind of self-vomping kind of thing. um it, Look, this whole thing was basically spun up by Trump himself announcing this date. And before that, it did seem like there was reporting saying, that they were kind of coming down to the wire, that they were, moving towards an indictment. And they've had a few more witnesses. I think the last thing was they had that guy David Pecker, who used to be the head of, I'm not sure he's the editor, publisher, owner, whatever, of the National Enquirer. So look, he's going to get indicted for this, or he's not. It's not some like Perils of Pauline kind of like up and down. What will happen? He was on the ropes and now he's back, and all of this is just self-referential press, Twitter, get everybody getting themselves stirred up. It'll happen or it won't. I suspect it will happen. And I suspect there will be other ones besides that too. But you're going to get this kind of chorus of self-womping that people are going to do, and they're all upset, and he's never going to, and blah and blah and blah. So I just wanted to let you know about that. You'll probably have heard about it by the time you're listening to this episode. As usual, we are recording just after noon on Wednesday afternoon, March 29th. But this, it's funny. The one the one thing that is kind of fascinating here is that the one impact of this phantom indictment, and again, I suspect this is going to happen, and this is just scheduling stuff. It was part of Trump's drama to make, oh, it's happening this time and now it's not happening. I think this is actually just scheduling stuff, and there's no it it this it doesn't matter. There's not a back and forth here. That's created by Trump and created by the media, of which we are some part. But the one one of the impacts of this phantom indictment is that it really knocked Ron DeSantis for down for the count. I mean, look, it's still 10 months away from any even primaries, right? So it's not like, did anything really happen there? Maybe not, but more than did in this indictment case. It has been one of the things we're going to talk about today is, the 100% absolute certainty among reporters that Ron DeSantis is toast and done, and an object of ridicule who small children see on the street and say shame, shame, and and all that kind of stuff. But the perception that these indictments were coming, and I suspect that's part of what Trump was doing. Although in general, I tend to think that Trump's drama and shenanigans are much more intuitive than theorized, for lack of a better word. Right? I don't think I don't think there's a lot of uh, strategy behind it. Strategy is kind of intuitive, instinctive for him. But one of the things that it has reminded us of, and that's good because people, I don't think, were paying attention to that if someone like Trump is being faced by multiple felony indictments in multiple jurisdictions, it is going to be pretty hard to run as the successor to Trump when Trump is running as the successor to Trump. Right? I mean, this would be so much easier for all of these people if Trump were gone, if he were dead, if he were in jail, if he just didn't want to run, saying like, hey, wasn't Trump awesome? And now I'm going to be an even better version of Trump. And that's what DeSantis is trying to do. But Trump is still running to be Trump. And when it will be, if it were a normal politician, it might be different. But Trump's whole thing, not so much in 2016. 2016 was different. But really starting in January, February of 2017, Trump's whole shtick is the deep state is against me. And the deep state is trying to destroy me. And they're trying to destroy me because they want to destroy you. So he's got a whole mythology to kind of package this into. And what we saw in that, the week of the phantom indictment was that for all the stuff we heard after the 2022 midterm election about how the party was moving on for Trump, moving on from Trump, he'd lost his magic, people were ready for all that kind of stuff. Man, everyone lined up behind him. And maybe you can say, well, they're kind of like, well, it's the deep state and it's out of control prosecutors and all that kind of stuff. That doesn't necessarily mean that they support him over Ron DeSantis. But all of us as humans, we have a hard time with cognitive dissonance. And if you are saying it is me and Trump in the foxhole, it's Trump or nothing, I'm going to sort of, put my life on the line for Trump, my political life on the. You can't do that. And I'll say, well, but I think I'd rather go with DeSantis as the nominee. That's just not going to happen. So we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about Trump's Waco far right celebration jamboree that he held, the precipitous fall and political demise of Ron DeSantis, so called, and then also the fact that you've got Trump's Freedom Caucus buddies and really everybody in the House, Republicans in the House, saying, please pay attention to us. We took the hostage and we were threatening to kill the hostage, and no one is talking to us. What are you going to do about the hostage? What if we kill the hostage? What are you going to do about it? No one will pay attention. And this is it's such a funny thing because this is setting aside what you, listener, thought was the election within the Obama administration, of which, of course, Joe Biden was a central figure, and many of the people who work in the Biden administration also worked in the Obama administration. This was a central learning event, something that those people all look back on and say, we screwed the fuck up. Because if you go back to 2011, the first time you did this debt ceiling hostage thing, President Obama was saying, we're going to sit down and have a negotiation. We're going to they're threatening to run the country into default, and we're going to make sense. We're going to sit down and negotiate over that. And then they kind of did something similar again a couple years later, not quite to the same extent. And then all those people in the Obama administration were looking back on that and saying, wow, that was stupid. And there's been this mantra, we're not going to do that again. And Joe Biden said, look, we're not going to negotiate over that. And he has, it's not over. And people in political science would say everything is, not negotiating is negotiating. But he's walked the walk, and that's what we're seeing. That's the reaction here, because he's not only is he not negotiating, he's not even like acknowledging them. They're kind of saying, "Hey, we're not gonna pass the debt ceiling," and he's just like, "Yeah, you are. Talk to you later." And so they're out there kind of saying this is not reasonable. We took the hostage, so where are the hostage negotiators? What's going on? Where's the SWAT team? What are we doing here? So we're going to talk about all those things. Me and my co-host Kate Riga, and Kate's gonna, Kate is the one who goes up to Capitol Hill and knows about all these people and all of that, and can give us some insight on all of that. But before we do that, let me remind you that the Josh Marshall podcast is brought to you by Grady's Cold Brew Iced Coffee. Making cold brew doesn't have to be complicated. You can do it without a French press, without a grinder, a scale, any of that stuff that, kind of sounds like you're a drug dealer or something like that. You don't even need a measuring spoon, even more like a drug dealer. I'm getting too deep into my Rolling Stones reading and Arcana. Any case, a beanbag bundle from Grady's gives you exactly what you need to make perfect iced tea. Just drop your beanbags in a pitcher, add water, and sleep on it. 12 hours later, you'll have 12 glasses of New Orleans-style cold brew ready to enjoy all week for less than $1 a glass. It's a no-brainer. The only decision you'll have to make is original, French vanilla, or decaf. I'd say original, to be honest with you. Ready to give it a swirl? Get 25% off at Grady'sColdBrew.com with promo code TPM. That's Grady'sColdBrew.com with promo code TPM. Okay, Kate Riga, what are we talking about?
I guess we'll just we'll start by kind of putting a pin in the ghost indictment stuff here, because when the schedule that has now been kind of like upset and disturbed, it's like nothing but Trump saying I'm getting arrested on Tuesday. And I think rightly people being like, well, he's probably has, not just talking completely out of his butt here, like there must be some reason. Which which I guess there wasn't. But, I saw someone say, well, like Trump got what he wanted, now they're afraid to hand down the indictment kind of thing. And it's like, that's silly, right? Like all we had to kind of bolster his claim are various indications that, the prosecutor wants to indict. That's basically what we had. And I think, you have both. So it's Trump. Nothing. We have no indication that anything that Trump has done has at all disturbed the schedule that this was going to operate on. I guess this hiatus was reportedly like pre-planned. We know from experience that grand juries usually don't meet every day that they're scheduled to, and that there are a lot of like schedule interruptions that delay stuff. Blah blah blah. And then also from like the political side, I think our colleague John Light made a good point, which is, even if say Trump did influence this and push back the indictment, like from a political vantage point, that is not particularly a bad thing, because I think a lot of people feel like if they had their druthers, this is not the indictment you would choose to come down first, just because this is, we've talked about this before. This one is kind of like small potatoes. It's an old story. I mean, it's definitely, there's like evidence of criminality, and that is a big deal. But in terms of like hush money payments that he kind of incorrectly wrote off as a campaign expenditure versus undermining an election, one of those looms a little larger than the other, right? So to the extent that we could play God with these indictments, I think a lot of people would say it's kind of a stronger story anyway if you have the bigger one come down and then these more piddling ones as just kind of like a heaping up effect on the legal trouble that Trump is in.
Yeah, I mean, as you say, I would go beyond saying there's no evidence that Trump influenced this. I I think not only is there no evidence that Trump influenced this, there is it is almost unimaginable that Trump influenced this. I just don't buy that. I just don't buy that. It's not like I suspect what this is that it wasn't 100% a done deal. They're still working on it. They listened to a few more witnesses. Now they're up against a kind of a scheduling issue. But again, it's Trump and the sort of the Trump drama machine that has created this. Like when I said now there's a month delay, I can hear some of our listeners not only in reverse podcast sound motion, but like in reverse, coming back in time from the future when they're listening, of saying a month. You know how long a month that is? That's a huge delay. But so there's no rush. There's no rush. There's just no rush. It, like literally, what is the rush? There's no rush. Maybe it'll happen. Maybe it won't happen. But he has created this sense of, again, like it has to happen. If it doesn't happen now, he's won and all this kind of stuff. None of that is the case. And, none of that is the case.
Yeah. So the same time that this has been happening, there have just been like a flurry of, as you mentioned, Josh, these like DeSantis sucks pieces and like his campaign is faltering, right? And donors are pausing and all this kind of stuff. Which is funny because if you kind of look at what DeSantis has done of late that has caused this like massive cratering in his campaign, right? You kind of had the flub on the Ukraine thing that he had to walk back. And then you had the little dance he had to do about, are you going to like pull down the garage door on the state of Florida and not let them come touch your man, like this should be a sanctuary state for Trump, where he did the answer where he was like, I don't know about paying off any porn stars, blah blah blah, but Alvin Bragg is the son of George Soros or whatever, that kind of like two-steppy thing.
Mm-hmm.
But what's funny about that is like you can argue that the Ukraine one in particular, like that was a genuine gaffe, right? But the other stuff is kind of just Trump has started being mean to him in public. And then all of a sudden it's like, whoof, panic. And it's like, well, what'd you think was going to happen, right? He was going to come on the stage with Trump and Trump was going to be like, I welcome a diversity of ideas and candidates. Let the best man win. Like, if that's all it takes to kind of get all the Republican backers scared, what were you expecting?
I think that's exactly it. I mean, look, I'll take a bit of a bow. I've been saying for a while, it's Trump's to lose. That DeSantis's chances are greatly overstated, and it's this funny kind of situation now that you have this big groupthink lurch in the other direction, kind of towards my opinion, not my opinion, the opinion that I happen to hold, that other wise and sagacious people also hold. But to that point, this is what Trump does, and not only does he do it, but it was always obvious that there are going to be all of these wickets that DeSantis has to navigate that are going to be really hard to navigate. That when Trump gets into legal trouble, he's going to try to say, "Oh well, it is the deep state, but you try to kind of pressure a porn star into sleeping with you, and this is what happens. I don't know about pressuring porn stars, not my wheelhouse." Tries to do that his chorus is going to say, "What the fuck, DeSantis? Are you betraying Trump? Are you part of the deep state?" I mean, that's obvious that is going to happen, and that's going to be tough. And I think the big thing here is that DeSantis is only a balloon inflated by the pressure of professional Republicans wanting to get rid of Trump because they think he's a loser now. And so he is just inflated by that. But what is he actually? He is pretty universally known as being awkward, not very charismatic, not he was known when he was in the House as a bit of a dick. Just kind of self-important, kind of, it's sort of Ted Cruz-y in a way. Not quite like that. No one's Ted Cruz. And I mean, not just in the sense of no one's Ted Cruz, but in the sense of like universally hated by his colleagues. But he wasn't like a glad-handing, like, hail fellow, well met type guy when he was in the House. He, I don't know how much this stuff matters, but he's at least known, it is understood by people who follow him that his kind of inner circle is him and his wife. And obviously there's probably a lot of kind of, misogynistic stuff like, oh, your wife, blah, 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 blah. But that's a pretty tight circle, even if you push all of that stuff away. And generally speaking, you want some kind of outside, some more outside voices to kind of give you advice and be sounding boards and stuff like that. And I think the Ukraine thing and trying to navigate the phantom indictment sort of showed people like, oh, okay, it's going to be complicated to do this, to run as Trump's successor when Trump is also running as Trump's successor. And he's not a genius. He's not a political genius. He's at very least fallible, and kind of he can be clumsy. And so it all kind of comes together. And I still think that it's as much as it is crazy to think that anything dramatically changed in the last 2 or 3 weeks. I just think he doesn't have it in him. And if I can just say one other thing, I think what you'll see now is you're going to have another anti-Trump meme stock candidate. If DeSantis really kind of falls apart, it's too soon for the people in the party who want to get rid of Trump to say like, okay, cool, Trump, right? They'll inflate someone else.
I think another piece of this is there's also just the fact that in our particularly horse racy political election coverage, a static race is not helpful to that endeavor. You can't write articles about, Trump continues to be the front runner and DeSantis is also there, or like these are the only two candidates who are serious at the moment. Like, that's not a story. But if you can get some people to say like, I don't know, I'm questioning DeSantis, like, but okay, there's a story, right? DeSantis is faltering, and then say Trump gets indicted, or DeSantis has some strong showing somewhere, or like hits back at Trump in a way that goes viral. All of a sudden, you can write a story that's like, Ron DeSantis, the comeback kid, you're not out of the woods quite yet, Trump. So, like, there is this kind of manufactured sense of movement that has to pervade this coverage because it like keeps it alive and keeps it kind of just kinetic and capturing people's attention. So I think fundamentally, nothing really huge happened in the past few days that showed any kind of DeSantis Trump dynamic that you and I haven't been talking about for like months. This stuff has been evident. And I don't think that any of his moments, even if they weren't the most kind of polished, were really the big, oh, he's done. Like a legitimate rape moment. Like you can't come back from that kind of thing. It's just more, this is always the dynamic. It was always really evident that it was going to be hard for anyone to beat Trump, no matter the number of like Lincoln Project-y never Trumpers who were like, this is the moment Republican voters will come to their senses. Like, that's baloney, right? So I think that is also just a layer that's like covering over this, just the bare, boring reality that you've got Trump, who's obviously the favorite. You've got DeSantis, who at least right now is kind of a live ball. And then, I mean, what else are you going to write about? Like Pompeo and Nikki Haley? It's not a very fruitful ground right now.
Yeah, I would say if there is going to be another, GOP Trump slayer meme stock, it's going to be Youngkin in
Mhm.
Virginia. Now, I don't think he's going anywhere either in the big picture. In the final analysis, he's not going to be the nominee, but he's at least one who he could plausibly be plugged into that space. He won in Virginia. Got it's been about a decade since a Republican won for governor in Virginia. You can say, ran and won in a blue state. He kind of, it's his argument, and a reasonable argument as far as it goes, that he found a way to kind of pull in the Trumpers and also pull in the sort of moderate Republican suburbanites, in Virginia. So I don't know who else could really be plugged in, but I think the way to think about not just Trump's and DeSantis's chances, but how things really are different, but also not different, is that Trump probably now has 50% support among Republicans. That is, it's a little hard to say since Trump was never at 50% when he's won last time, right? When you're president and head of the party and no one is running against you, it's pretty easy to have 90% support, right? I mean, because you're no one is challenging you. Having said that, clearly Trump is not where he was in 2020, even in 2021, but it is still really hard to unseat someone who is just routinely gets 50% support, right? I mean, that's really tough. And you need someone of, I think, preternatural political skills to manage that central thing, which is running to be Trump's successor while Trump is also running to be his successor. That's tough.
Right. Yeah, no, I think that's all right. So the other kind of big Trump news besides his impending potential indictment is that he gave this big speech in Waco, a little town known for having a standoff between the Branch Davidians and the, well, law, the law, various law enforcement entities. Um, and it's one of those kind of standoffs that has become especially kind of right wing lore. It inspired the Oklahoma City bomber. It's one of those kind of, it's in the camp of Ruby Ridge. It's that kind of thing of the overbearing, violent government wouldn't let these people just like live their way of life, so they came in with guns, and that's the way it's spun. We don't have to get into the particulars of the Branch Davidians and what they were getting up to there. But so that's where Trump held his rally. And my favorite detail of this story is that Trump like spokesperson was like, totally random. Yeah, no, just a convenient spot in Texas for us to all meet up. Just I barely even knew about the history of this spot, which is like pretty hilarious. Famously, Texas is absent of major centers except for Waco, so it makes sense.
Yeah,
Um,
I mean, it's not like a town with 10 people live there. But it's not Austin, and it's not
exactly.
Dallas. And it's funny. I don't know for younger people. I mean, it was a pretty shocking thing when it happened, right? I mean, I'm still of. There's always been a question of whether when the FBI moved in with the tear gas, did the tear gas, start a fire
Mhm.
inadvertently? Obviously, there's lots of conspiracy theories about the federal government intentionally torching the place. Um, my assumption has always been that they lit it themselves when they saw the FBI, bashing the doors down and everything. Do I know that for certain? No, of course not. I mean, it's certainly possible when you're using, I guess, tear gas that something can happen or whatever. But just the way that it was, before it got laid over with all of the political stuff, it was pretty shocking when it happened. Because again, the standoff went on for, I don't know, 6 weeks or something, a long period of time. And it had this is before we had all the Bundy stuff. And, before this stuff kind of became a bit familiar in a way. And it seemed a bit comical because, he's this guy, he's getting biblical prophecies. They're kind of doing this kind of, slow walking the FBI. When I get my next prophecy, will come out and everything. So it had this kind of like one element that was kind of comic. And before then, it wasn't. No, I mean, obviously, after the fact, a lot of question, and even before the fact, what was going on there, how were kids being treated, and all this kind of stuff. A mix of comic stuff, other people, again, before all the politics got added, thinking like, what the fuck, like this is like there's a warrant, like can these just kind of crazies just kind of say no to the FBI for, forever. Let's get this resolved. So all these kind of things. And then like I remember I came home from work one day and I flipped on CNN and you just see like this little like smoking rubble. And that's how it ended. Right. So it was like pretty damn shocking. Again, whoever was at fault, all the different ins and outs and blah 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 blah. And it quickly became this core thing. And as you say, it was the central sort of inspiration for the Murrow Federal Building bombing 2 years later. It was done on the anniversary of it to make that point. So for those of us who are old enough to have remembered it as adults, it's pretty damn shocking that you would obviously kind of choose it to kind of, this is where I'm putting my cards down on this Waco stuff and tying, bringing a bunch of January 6 people there and kind of, celebrating them. It's certainly not like no one has paid attention to that anniversary part of it, but it it's pretty shocking even for Trump.
Yeah. He opened with a montage from January 6th stuff. Like you say, there was some kind of performances by January 6th
They
people,
have like a
a
choir
choir.
that
Yeah.
he like that he's part of, and you can
Right.
buy it on Amazon or something. It's
Yeah.
really kind of unreal.
And then the speech was, you know, had all the greatest hits, right? Like majority of it is grievancy type stuff, like they're only coming after me because they can't get to you because I'm standing in the way. A classic DeSantis story where he comes up to Trump sobbing and he's like, "Please, won't you endorse me?" Blah blah blah. Like classic in that people started to hit the doors like after 30 minutes of this, like trying not to get stuck in the parking lot. It had all the hallmarks, but the thing about Trump is he's always been this blend of like comedically buffoonish and hatefully malicious, and those things always are in concert with each other. And this was so one of those things because there's so much stuff you can make fun of here, like the fact that we've heard this speech 8 billion times before, that he's started a musical group with the people who try to sack the Capitol. But then also you have him trying to tap into this vein of American history that is really dangerous, and that a lot of, you know, radicalized people have used Waco and Oklahoma City and Ruby Ridge and all that to kind of as proof points that the government and, as various law enforcement arms are, dangerous and will crush people who have like independent thought. And the end result of that is, so that's the rationale for striking back, right? For attacking the deep state kind of thing. And that, theoretically is kind of just a anti-government stance, but when you have people who carry that out, that means attacks on, government workers or government buildings, or like there's so many innocent people who are like tied up in this and just trying to do government jobs. And him so just blatantly embracing that movement of, the 3%ers and the militia people and the gun people. I mean, it's not like this is new, but I do think that doing it in Waco is just it's brazen, right?
I think one thing, in a post recently, I mentioned that I think it was a post about DeSantis and this, ongoing question of can DeSantis dethrone Trump, all that kind of stuff. That when DeSantis tried to, hedge on the phantom indictment of saying it's bad, it's, I don't, kind of doing it with a porn star, that's not in my wheelhouse, so I can't really, just don't have any experience with that. That whole kind of thing, that sort of, or when he was trying to kind of come after Trump saying, but character is important. George Washington had character. You know what I mean, right? Character. That kind of like attempted nuance, if you want to call it that, that does not work in the Trump era pro wrestling GOP. That's not how it works. How it works is kind of over the top. DeSantis came to me. He was crying. He said his wife was going to leave him because he was such a loser. And would I help him? All this kind of stuff. And I mentioned wrestling, and a few people have kind of brought this up with me. And, because I'm not the only one who has made this comparison, and a lot of other people who are much more into professional wrestling have sort of articulated this point much more fully, that there really is a lot about this that Trump learned from like Vince McMahon and the world of professional wrestling. Because what you said about that kind of like on the, when he has these things, on the one hand, it's old hat, and there's a certain element of it that, when Trump is saying, and he came to me in tears, little Ron DeSantis, my little meatball, where Trump knows that we all talk about his tears shtick, about how all these kind of brawny men coming to him in tears. So there's this mix of intentionally cartoonish, we're having fun here, it's all kind of a joke, and also Waco, and any federal judge who makes a ruling against me, maybe some sniper is going to take you out. Ha ha ha. It's this mix of like, it's all fake, but wait, some of it's kind of real, and that makes it work for Trump. That's kind of his thing, and you're sort of you're kind of baffled by it. You're like, wait, what? Like I can't disentangle the kind of we're having fun here with the Trump greatest hits, sir comments, in tear stuff, and also Waco, and also, are you really there with the Jan 6 people? And also you're singing a song with them? That's obviously a joke. That mix of serious and joke is that's kind of what professional wrestling is. Everybody knows it's fake, but it's it works somehow for people who are into wrestling. I mean, I it's not my thing, but there's a whole kind of there's a whole underground of sort of like pro wrestling intellectuals, right? Kind of they're writing for partisan review, and also like hitting the wrestling event. Um, but on that, that's Trump's magic, and that is kind of one of the reasons that Ron DeSantis he can't play in that world. He can't. He can do the whole, like, that Trump thing. What is it? The hand gesture stuff, and how he's aped his whole things. But that is something Trump is just good at. And because he has a sense of humor, and in his own way, he has a kind of kind of predatory charm to him. DeSantis doesn't have that, and he can't really he just can't play in that genre, right? It's not his.
So let's move on to the newest kind of debt ceiling nonsense from Kevin McCarthy, which was basically this letter that he, one of those letters that people in Washington send where they like publish it on Twitter the moment they mail it, where it's, a private correspondence, but here on Twitter, where he does so many layers of kind of silly, unserious hypocrisy that you have to detangle it. But the thrust of it is he's saying, you, Mr. President, are being a dangerous extremist because you won't negotiate with us in order for us to raise the debt ceiling. And because of that, you are fiscally irresponsible and putting the American people at risk. And so the first layer of that, Josh, you talked about in the intro, right, which is that the White House keeps saying we're not debating stuff over the debt ceiling. We're not doing it when you have like a knife to the throat of the hostage. We'll do it when it comes time for Congress to craft a budget, which it has to do every year, but we're not doing it now. And then, of course, the second level is McCarthy / the Republicans have yet to produce a budget that the entire caucus coalesces behind. Now, that is for some really obvious reasons, which is that it's a lot easier for Republicans to be kind of the party of like culture war / obstruction than to try to get all these people behind any kind of like coherent, specific policy proposals. So to kind of cover himself, McCarthy put these like 5 bullet points in there as like an offering of what they'll be willing to debate. And it is like clockwork, I tell you, that you have the CNN sort write up of this was like, McCarthy, demands like stronger assurances on the debt ceiling or something ridiculous like that. And then in Political Playbook, it breaks down each of these bullet points as what's the possibility that Democrats and Republicans will be able to come together on these things. And just to give listeners an idea of the vagueness we're talking about, this was one of the bullet points. Policies to grow our economy and keep America safe, including measures to lower energy costs, make America energy independent, and secure our border from the flow of deadly fentanyl that is killing 300 Americans per day. Like, cool. Okay. I mean, I don't understand why anyone's acting like this is not just a messaging document. That was one sentence that had like 3 different clauses about energy independence, securing the border. I mean, generally in Washington, the devil tends to be in the details. So it's so profoundly silly. And this practice of giving Republicans cover on the debt ceiling when what they're doing is threatening to blow up our economy and the global economy, is which is one of the proudest traditions in these like beltway outlets, and there's just never any learning from it at all.
Well, I would say, yes, and the other part of this that, and you see this playing out, you refer to in the GOP caucus, is that not only can they not agree amongst themselves over what they, what they support, but what they want to do, and you can see this in, the Republican Study Committee. I always was it study committee. I always get the exact words wrong.
That's right.
Yeah, the which is most of the caucus. It's something like 3/4
Yeah.
of the caucus. What they support is really unpopular. They're talking about, like, they claim it, they don't want to cut Social Security and Medicare, but what they actually do want to cut them, and cut all sorts of other things that are total third railed. They're cutting border enforcement. They're cutting everything. These massive cuts. Those cuts are really unpopular. So they want to stick behind culture war stuff, as you said, but they also want to say, ending the federal debt and reducing spending and all that kind of stuff. But the actual specifics they want are totally toxic politically. So what McCarthy, you've got the Freedom Caucus people who are happy to run right into that buzzsaw, because it's not their buzzsaw. They're all in safe seats, with a couple of exceptions. Oddly, uh, Lauren Boebert is actually one of them. She's not in a safe seat. She came within what, a few hundred votes
Mhm.
of losing her seat. So, in a perverse sense, good for her that she's still remaining totally crazy. But they're happy to do it. He doesn't want to do it because he wants to hold on to his majority. So he wants Joe Biden to get into a negotiation with things that he will not disclose publicly, get Joe Biden to agree not to the maximal Freedom Caucus stuff, but to a lot of very big cuts, so that Republicans will be happy, that they will be happy with Kevin McCarthy, and it won't matter anymore that they will be fairly toxic politically, or at least things that a substantial majority of the country opposes, because if you have an agreement, Joe Biden will own it just as much as Kevin McCarthy. So it becomes neutered as a political thing, because we are in we exist in a binary political system. There are two parties, and it's a zero sum between the two. Yes, you can talk about your third party and your independence and blah 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 blah, but our actual government in the real world is a two-party system, and that's what they want. That's how Kevin McCarthy and Republicans who think about top of the ticket, big picture things want to do it. But the White House is saying, no, we're not gonna negotiate at all. And to even discuss it, you need to tell us exactly what you are for. We've told you what we're for. We're going to add some spending. We're going to raise some taxes, bring in more money. We're going to, lower the deficit by $80 quadrillion over the next decade. All of these things are kind of notional, right? But you can, if you add tax revenues, you can do it. But they have a budget document out there, and this is, the White House clearly thinks it's working for them. I mean, it's one of these things where I don't think there's any question it's working for them. It's still going to be a pretty big bummer if you have a big debt default crisis uh, sometime in late summer or something like that. And that could work for them too, right? I mean, the politics could work for them, but that still won't, you know, uh, won't necessarily, maybe everybody will blame the Republicans for unemployment jumping up to 12% or something like that, but it'll still be 12%. And we have no idea what the immediate impact of a default would be. It's one of these kind of perverse things. I've even seen some people arguing, and I'm not even sure this is just possible. It may even be probable. You could actually see a rush into dollars, even though that makes no sense, right? It doesn't make sense that people are going to be trying to get into dollars and into U.S. debt if the U.S. is defaulting on its debt. But you still have the fact that everybody probably thinks that it'll be resolved pretty soon, and we have 70 plus years of the US dollar being the underpinning of the global economy, and in a period of great chaos you're probably going to want to get back into that, despite that making no sense. And I'm not saying that's going to happen. I'm more making the point that we don't know what the immediate impact of all that can be, because it's so unthinkable. But if nothing else, you can just say that for now they're doing what they said, of just kind of telling the Republicans, we're just not even going to talk about you. And you can tell it's driving them nuts, driving them absolutely nuts, because you have McCarthy now saying, like, Joe Biden's extreme policies of not negotiating with us, when we're threatening to drive the country into default. They've like, the GOP has in this hostage taking situation, they've rebranded themselves as the committee to save the hostage. Right? We're no longer, that's our new party name. But how it all, at some point someone has to blink, and with the way that the GOP caucus functions, I don't know if they will blink. Even if they're losing, they can lose and still not blink.
This is also a situation where, for once, Democrats kind of have the pithier sell. This is like a constant asymmetrical problem that Republicans are so good at talking in sound bites, at not engaging with nuance on issues, and then it's a lot easier for them to kind of say their catchphrase, and then force Democrats to try to be like, well, blah 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 blah, and that's like a kind of a constant messaging chasm. But here, I think Democrats just really have the better message, and that it's really, as complicated as like the debt ceiling is as a concept, it's easy for Democrats to say, let's all just raise the debt ceiling, and then when you guys get yourselves together, you can tell us what you want to negotiate, and then we're more than happy to negotiate with you. That's kind of, it's easy. It makes the Democrats sound like they're kind of being the mature parties involved. Like, let's just work together first, okay, Kev, and then you tell us what you want to do, and we'll see what we can get done. Whereas for Republicans, now they have to do a thing where they're saying, you're being an extremist because you won't negotiate with us over issues that we have not yet identified, that actually don't have anything to do with the debt ceiling, but that must be done by the debt ceiling because we're actually using that as leverage. Like, that's a harder thing to kind of condense and sell in a really understandable way. And like, you can go on Fox News and just say Joe Biden's being extreme and it won't let us raise the debt ceiling, but it's just, as we've seen from the way that they are kind of stumbling all over on this, and that the White House is like exulting in this situation, it's just not working as well.
You make a really good point, and I hadn't thought of it in quite this way until you put it that way. That, ironically, it is not the criminal irresponsibility of threatening to drive the country into default that is really undoing them. It's the refusal to say what they actually want.
Yeah.
Because the part of the stupidity of this whole debt ceiling concept, only like 4 or 5 countries in the world have this, right? Again, it's like your credit card. When you swipe your card, you are both agreeing to buy and agreeing to pay. You don't sit down with the credit card company in a month and say, well, I don't know, Josh has been a little profligate and I need to get my house in order so I'm not paying my bill. Like, no, that's not how it works, right? But it gets conflated, and that's kind of, in this nonsensical way, kind of like, we're in a lot of debt, so we can't raise the debt ceiling because that's more debt. Well, not really, but that's this kind of twisted thing that no one really understands. So they can kind of sort of make that work, kind of, maybe, kind of, sort of, but by not saying what they even support, that makes them sound silly.
Mm-hmm.
And people can understand silly. If you were saying kind of like, what showing my age here, the commercial where the guy has the battery on his shoulder and he's like, go ahead, knock it off my shoulder. Was it William Devane? You're going to have no idea even what I'm talking about, Kate.
No.
Anyway, this is like some commercial from the 80s or something like that. It's kind of like a Clint Eastwood kind of thing. Like, go ahead, make my day. But if Clint's saying, but I'm not saying what will make my day or what I'll do if you do make my day, but please go ahead and make my day. And I will reserve till later discussing what I will do if you make my day and what making my day will consequence. People are like, what? Like, what? What are you talking about? Go ahead, make my day. That has a lot of force because you're saying, like, I don't have to explain. You know what I mean. But if you're in this whole kind of thing about, but you make my day, but once you make my day, you're going to be in the dark about what happened. Then you're just silly. And that's really what is kind of, that is the hook that is kind of pulling them down. Because if they, and again, the reason it's not like they stumbled into this, they don't want to say, because because if they put that budget out and say, okay, here's what it is. We are going to, anybody who is on Obamacare, you're going to lose all your subsidies, and we're going to dramatically, we're going to shut down all the federal parks. We're going to dramatically cut back on immigration, everything. I mean, if you leave the big things out, you have to cut everything tremendously. So now they're just kind of stuck, and that just makes them sound silly. And perversely, and this has always been a kind of a key thing in our politics. Maybe it's in every country's politics, but this is the country that I have some insight into how its politics works. Being silly is much more damaging than being evil, because it's weird and it's mockable. Whereas evil, people say, well, he's evil. That's hardcore. Got to respect that, right? It's this weird kind of perverse thing about our politics, but that's what it is.
Yeah. So to wrap up on this kind of a grim note, but yet again, there was another school shooting on Monday. It was a private Christian school. There were 3 children dead, 3 adults, and then also the shooter. And in the aftermath of the shooting, reporters asked Dick Durbin, who you, Josh, have brought up a lot, about, okay, what next? Like, what's going to be the response? Which, we've gotten to this point in American life where you pretty much know that no additional amount of dead children is going to move the needle on this. But he said, I was so struck. He said that, something kind of mumbling in the direction of, I want to do background checks, but I'm a realist, like when it gets to the Senate floor, it's going to be a problem, that kind of thing. And it's just like, oh my God, even like, that's correct. No gun legislation is going to pass Congress right now. But it's just this like profoundly weird, broken response to be like, nah, you know what? Between the filibuster and the Republicans, nah, it's not even worth the effort, right? It's not even worth
But
trying.
did he even say the filibuster and the Republicans?
No, that's
That's the
exactly
point.
right.
That's
Exactly. I'm just saying
yeah.
he got to the point of like, nah, that seems like it's not going to work. And that's the response you give. I mean, at the very, very least, you have to say, I think this is an atrocity and I'm heartbroken and I'm furious. And we are going to put a bill up and Republicans are going to block it like they always do. And that's more blood on their hands. But this impassioned, weak or dispassionate, weak kind of like, that's the reality, ladies and gents. It's not worth our time. We have other priorities. Like, while children sized coffins are being built is just, I find it so weird and self-defeating. And then of course you have uh Cornyn, a Republican, saying, "Oh, I think we've gone as far as we're going to go on this." And then Tim Burchett, a House Republican, this clip like caught fire, but he said, he said, "Oh, we don't worry about that with our daughter because she's homeschooled." Which, oh my god! And then he opened by saying, "Yeah, we're not gonna fix this,"
Isn't
which
he? Isn't he from the district, or like, or at least from
Tennessee.
the Tennessee?
Yeah,
He's at least, if it's not his district, he's like adjoining that district. So it's
right.
not like he's from another part of the country. It's like his people.
At least he's being honest that he's like, "My daughter isn't in direct harm, so I'm not gonna worry about it. Other people's kids don't trouble me." But it's the kind of thing where it's hard to feel anything but just utter and all-consuming cynicism on this topic. Like, I'll admit, I spent all of Monday just feeling so depressed and defeated because we live in a country where this keeps happening and is going to keep happening. But just this kind of, oh my god, Dick Durbin's just mealy mouthed like shrug. And I know he put out a video later saying this is unacceptable, so I guess there was some cleanup being done. But still, I mean, it is emblematic sometimes of the Democratic response to things, that you're just like, just show some anger, show some fight at the very least. This is kind of like when we were talking about Dobbs and Elizabeth Warren went out and met all the protesters in front of the Supreme Court building and gave a speech where she got really, really, angry and emotional. And it's like, that's just the very least that you can do in these situations.
Well, I think, to me, it's a couple things in my mind. One is just Senate brain.
Yeah.
That from Dick Durbin's perspective, he's the deputy leader. One of his things is, the Senate's business. And the Senate is, there's various non-controversial pieces of legislation they're pushing through. They're going to have to come up with a budget. They're trying to move through judicial nominations, all of which are real and important. And if your reality is just the Senate, you're probably thinking like, look, obviously nothing we do is going to go anywhere. That would just slightly delay this judicial nomination or whatever like that, or this other thing. So it's not going to happen, and it's too bad. But what's the point? But when you say it just can't happen, there's nothing we can do, people look at that and say, wow, what world are you living in? Like, or like, what's wrong with our system of government? If that's the case, if you're sort of notionally on the side of, tightening rules about gun, and you're just like, oh, I can't do anything, you at least have to say, President Biden did a better job of this, where he basically said, hey, I've maxed out all I can do with executive orders. And the issue is the Congress and Republicans in Congress. And they don't care. And I've done everything I can. This is an example of, there is something reflexive in our public culture, that it is somehow bad and tawdry to make points political. Now, there are certain meanings of that phrase where that might be true, but it is actually civically wrong not to make the point of what is actually happening. Republicans, because of the filibuster, they control on this. Republicans have said absolutely nothing on gun control. I guess they had that minor bill they passed, for the people who got it passed, great. I'm not diminishing their achievement, but it is a relatively minor change. But you owe it to people. You more than owe it to people. You have to be clear with people where the problems are and what is causing the problems, because otherwise you're just lying to them. It's not like, oh, that's all we can do. Oh, it's so sad. The problem is that Republicans have a lot of political power, and they are saying, We will not do anything. So if you're upset, what you need to do is reduce Republicans' political power. That's the reality. And doing this kind of like sad sack wah, that's lying to people. It's not even a matter of like, well, you didn't go political, you didn't make it a political issue. It is a political issue. The issue is Republicans refuse to do anything on guns, and Republicans have enough power that they can just veto anything. And that is, we are kind of at a standstill, but you need to show people, like, why are we at a standstill? Well, we're at a standstill because there's this metal door in front of us with a big lock on it and a 10 locks and a a, a a a wood plank and all this kind of stuff, and we can't get through the door. And the door is the Republican Party and its political power. So if you're upset, you at least need to show people what the problem is, not just this like vague, well, we've done everything we can. That's you know, it is worth understanding that they have their world of scheduling and stuff like that, and that is real to them. But they don't or should not live in a hermetically sealed bubble. They run for office. They're in the politics business. They're allowed to watch TV, right? There's no real excuse that they are so oblivious or so indifferent to these realities. They shouldn't be, but they are, and that's a lot of how that functions, and it shouldn't function that way. And people who have power like that really owe it to everyone not to act that way, not to talk that way, not to lie to people that way.
It reminds me of when Cinema's office got so mad at me because I tweeted her response to, I mean, who can even remember at this point, but whatever school shooting had happened at this time. Um, and I just juxtaposed what she said with what Mark Kelly said. And
Right.
Mark Kelly had said it's fucking nuts to do nothing. And she said something like, oh, we don't need DC solutions to this problem,
Right.
talking about the filibuster. And they went bananas at me and they were like, you need to put in the rest of her statement, which was her saying that she's deeply saddened and, wants to do something about gun violence kind of thing. And it's so funny because my response was just what you're saying. I mean, like, okay, her feeling sad that children are shot is not news or interesting. It's the assumption, right? And that matters a whole lot less to what kind of legislation can be passed than whether or not she will allow, at the very least, a filibuster carve out to pass some kind of significant gun legislation, right? Because and what came of that is the bill you mentioned. And it's funny because I went back to look at its details when I was writing about this the other day, and it's small. It really is like both the most powerful gun reform that has passed in years and totally just nibbling around the edges. And this all happened too. The Washington Post just did this series like on the AR-15, and one of the pieces, they got permission from the victims' families, but of a Parkland kid and a Sandy Hook kid, and they used like the autopsy photos and report to recreate what the bullets did to these children's bodies. I mean, and it's rough. Like, it is so hard to read, but then just having this visceral, emotional, angering thing juxtaposed with with Durbin's mealy mouthness and Cinema being like, well, the filibuster is really just a DC problem. It just like makes you want to like pull your hair out, because it's like, it's what you said. It's at the very, very least here, the politics and the reality are the same. So you should be screaming from the rooftops that Republicans are enabling this to happen. This most visceral, heinous crime, they are enabling it and making sure that it will continue to happen. And that's why, you, the voter, need to elect more Democratic senators and get the House back. And, obviously that's a tall order, but at least it's channeling people's emotions somewhere instead of just meeting like this repeated grief with, that unfortunately is the way it is and the way it's always going to be. So you should just feel probably pretty defeated by this, which incidentally is exactly how, the gun companies and the gun lobbies and their Republican supporters want you to feel in this moment.
Yeah, no, that is exactly it. And the political system gets clogged when people don't understand the mechanics of why things happen and why things happen the way they do. Because if you say, look, Republicans are dead set against any changes, and we know that in this country it's basically a 50-50 country right now, more or less, kind of fiddles back and forth around that sort of dead even stalemate space. And it will only change if Democrats have substantial majorities, and or Republicans start changing their views or electing people who don't have that. And I think if you're the average person, you look at that and say, okay, well, it's a tall order, right? I see why it's tough. I see where the problem is. But Democrats take back the House. Democrats get two or three seat majority in the Senate, as we talked about last year with abortion policy. It's 60 votes until it isn't. It's 60 votes until you have 50 with the vice president, 51 votes in the Senate to change the rules that make it 60. So it's really 50. You need 50 people who are willing to vote on a majority basis for any of these things. So it's actually not Herculean, right? It's not something like, well, just give Democrats a 70-seat majority in the Senate and we'll get it all wrapped up. Or even 60. I mean, again, Democrats had two successive wave elections in 2006 and 2008, and they got to 60, like briefly. And Republicans did everything they could to kind of bottle Al Franken up in Minnesota for about 6 months. So he didn't get seated until like the middle of 2009. And then Ted Kennedy's seat was lost. So it was, the whole thing was for like 6 months or something like that. That is the sort of historical accident that allowed Obamacare to be passed. But again, it's 60 votes until 50 or 51 decide it's not 60 votes. It's not impossible, but that's what it will take. And it may take, because there's a lot of people in line for 51 votes. You've got people who care about abortion rights who are in line for it. You've got 20 other issues, right? Of people who issues that are really important. So guns may not even be first on the list, right? But that's what it will take. And the one thing you just, I'm flogging a dead horse here, but the one thing you can't do is just tell people, well, it just can't happen because this, because that, because then it's just people get demoralized and they start checking out of politics more generally. And that is something that is both bad if you think these issues are important. It's also dangerous just in a more general sense, because you need people civically involved and all that good stuff. And I know that Kate, you've been writing about, as other people have, Michigan, which is kind of becoming the example case. You get everybody kind of focused, say, hey, all these things that we think are super important, give us majorities and we'll do those things.
Mm-hmm.
Now, it so happens, I don't, what is it that I think they have a gun legislation issue, but it's pretty, it's relatively, they're not banning guns. Republicans are saying they're banning guns. But they're getting rid of right to work. They're passing this sort of, abortion legislation, all this kind of stuff. And that's clearly what you need at the federal level to kind of say all these things that you're kind of so sick of that never gonna change. do this, that, and the other, pass, and we'll do them. And that's good. And that really that is why what is so bad about the filibuster is not that it makes it the case that Democrats can't have nice things. It makes it the case that the band connecting political activity to political change gets severed.
Mm-hmm.
And that is really destructive, because people say, wait a second, you got the president, you got the House, you got the Senate. So, and you were going to do this. What happened? Like, you must be frauds, right? It builds that kind of cynicism. And, people on the left, and not like the left, people, Democrats say, well, if we get rid of the filibuster, they're going to come in and they're going to do this, that, and the other. Well, that would suck, but that's politics. And if they do all the terrible things, you come back 2 years later and you run against them. And again, you have to have the integuments that connect your vote and your results to something happening. And when that's broken, everything breaks down. Anyway, we're over our time. We've given you an extra helping of the awesomeness we bring you every week on the Josh Marshall podcast. But I think we've covered it, right? We got all of our stuff in. Okay. Yep. Let me remind you, the Josh Marshall podcast is brought to you by Grady's Cold Brew Iced Coffee. You can get 25% off at Grady'sColdBrew.com with promo code TPM. That's Grady'sColdBrew.com with promo code TPM. And I think that's it for us this week.
All right. See you next week.
Later.
The Josh Marshall podcast is hosted by me, TPM reporter Kate Riga, and TPM founder, editor-in-chief Josh Marshall. The show is produced by Jackie Wilhelm. Thanks to Why Not Jansfeld for our podcast theme song, and thanks to all our TPM members who make this possible. Rate and review us on Apple Podcasts, and subscribe wherever you listen.